Dear friends, greetings at our webinar and discussion entitled Approaches to Building of a Culture of Peace and Critical Study of Armed Conflicts in Civic Education. Thank you for joining us. Also, I am grateful to our speakers who agreed to share their invaluable experience. We will have two working languages at our webinar, English and Russian. My presentation and slides will be bilingual. Other speakers will present in English, and I hope that we have audience with enough language skills to understand presentations. If you have questions to presenters, write your questions in chat in Russian and English. Questions and answers will be in the end of all presentations. You could either take a floor or ask in chat. I will try to help with translation of questions and answers. Now I will repeat it in Russian. Уважаемые друзья, рады приветствовать вас на нашем вебинаре дискуссии под названием «Подходы к созиданию культуры мира и критическому изучению вооруженных конфликтов в гражданском образовании». Спасибо за то, что присоединились к нам. Особенно благодарен нашим спикерам, которые согласились поделиться опытом. У нас на вебинаре будут два рабочих языка – русский и английский. Мой доклад и презентация будут на двух языках, другие докладчики будут выступать на английском. Я надеюсь, что у нас достаточно грамотная аудитория, чтобы понять выступление. Если у вас есть вопросы к докладчикам, пишите их в чат на русском или на английском. Вопросы и ответы будут в конце всех выступлений, начиная с вопросов из чата и заканчивая экспромтами. При необходимости я постараюсь помочь с переводом вопросов и ответов. From ancient times, people thought a lot about a question. Is it possible to achieve peace by complete destruction of the enemy? Like, for example, Romans destroyed Carthage. But when Carthage was destroyed, not all population was killed, and some people were taken slaves. And then, of course, slavery destroyed Roman Empire because there were a lot of social unrest because of that. So it is not realistic to destroy any enemy if we are talking not about modern countries, but even about some ancient town. Are there other ways to achieve peace? And what knowledge, skills, and sacrifices will each of these ways require to achieve peace by destruction or by peace building? And main problem here is, of course, violence. People could harm themselves and others because of ignorance, negligence, or intentional cruelty. People need knowledge and skills necessary to live without violence, without harm to each other, which means that people need to respect each other and give up some whims and ambitions, sacrifice some pleasures and tolerate some discomfort for the sake of self-discipline and socialization. It is true for interpersonal relations to avoid brawls, and it is true for international relations to avoid wars. Teaching next generations to fight wars is a very common thing, but even the most skilled soldiers knows that it is impossible to win all battles, and eventually a more strong opponent will kill you. To survive, you need to know how to resist war, not your opponent. In other words, you need to learn how to talk instead of fighting. You need knowledge and ethics which unites people instead of dividing them. This idea led to development of the culture of peace. Declaration on a Culture of Peace adopted by the General Assembly of United Nations defines a culture of peace as a set of values, attitudes, traditions, and modes of behavior and ways of life based on respect for life, ending of violence, and promotion and practice of nonviolence through education, dialogue, and cooperation, commitment to peaceful settlement of conflicts. And there are other pillars of culture of peace reflecting concepts of negative peace, which is absence of violence, and positive peace, which is presence of justice. Article 4 of this declaration says that education at all levels is one of the principal means to build a culture of peace. And in this context, human rights education is of particular importance. Idea is that instead of cultural violence, harmful traits in culture, education must teach for peace. Peace education movement starts from 1840s by efforts of women's groups to build a world in which disputes would be settled peacefully. A cartoon of Herluf Bidstrup at the slide perfectly shows the role of women in emergence of peace education. Contemporary world is moving towards development of peace culture, and it is a result of multiplicity of different forms of peace education and the efforts of many great educators like Maria Montessori led to this result. Now I repeating it in Russian. Итак, издревле люди много думали над вопросами. Можно ли достичь мира путем полного истребления противника? Есть ли другие пути к миру? Ведь истребить противника не очень реалистично. Вспомним, как римляне уничтожали Карфаген. Даже при том, что им вроде бы удалось уничтожить город, все же 50 тысяч человек они взяли в качестве рабов. И в конечном счете рабство разрушило Римскую империю, потому что это было постоянным источником разнообразных потрясений, восстаний и тому подобного. То есть даже когда мы не говорим о больших современных государствах, даже когда мы говорим о мире, в котором все строится вокруг более-менее небольших городов, все равно уничтожить противника, даже если это город-государство, невозможно. Значит, есть ли другие пути к миру? Каких знаний, умений и жертв потребует каждый из этих путей? Главная проблема, конечно, в насилии. Люди могут причинить вред себе и другим из-за невежества, небрежности или преднамеренной жестокости. Поэтому людям необходимы знания и навыки для того, чтобы жить без насилия, без причинения вреда друг другу. А это значит, что люди должны уважать друг друга и отказываться от некоторых прихотей и амбиций, жертвовать некоторыми удовольствиями и терпеть некоторые неудобства ради самодисциплины и социализации. Как для нормальных межличностных отношений нужно избегать драк, так и для международных отношений нужно избегать войн. Обучение следующих поколений ведению войны – обычное дело, но даже самый опытный солдат знает, что невозможно выиграть все сражения. И в конце концов более сильный противник убьет вас. Чтобы выжить, нужно уметь противостоять войне, а не противнику. Другими словами, нужно научиться общаться, а не драться. Нужны знания и этика, которые объединяют людей, а не ссорят их. Эта идея привела к развитию культуры мира. Декларация о культуре мира, принятая Генеральной Ассамблеей Организации Объединенных Наций, определяет культуру мира как сочетание ценностных установок, мировоззренческих взглядов, традиций, типов поведения и образов жизни, основанных на уважении к жизни, прекращении насилия и поощрении ненасилия и практическом отказе от насилия через посредство образования, диалога и сотрудничества, приверженности мирному урегулированию конфликтов. И есть другие столпы культуры мира, отражающие понятие негативного мира, то есть отсутствие насилия, и позитивного мира, то есть присутствие справедливости. Please, I hear a lot of noise in my ear. Can you take off your sound? I do it myself. Now, в статье 4 Декларации о культуре мира, как я уже говорил, основанная на главных столпах жизни без насилия и мирного решения конфликтов. Отсутствие насилия – это понятие позитивного мира, присутствие справедливости – это отсутствие насилия – это понятие негативного мира, присутствие справедливости – это понятие позитивного мира. Вот в статье 4 этой декларации говорится о том, что образование на всех уровнях является основным средством созидания культуры мира. И в этом контексте имеет особое значение образование в области прав человека, именно потому, что справедливость основана прежде всего на удовлетворении базовых потребностей людей, реализации прав человека. И надо знать, как это делается. Это и есть позитивный мир. Недостаточно просто стремиться к тому, чтобы решать конфликты без насилия и исключать конфликты из общественной жизни. Нужно еще уметь удовлетворять потребности так, чтобы люди не были вынуждены прибегать к насилию. Так что идея в том, что вместо культурного насилия, вредных пристрастий в том или ином культурном и генетическом коде образование должно учить миру. Движение за воспитание в духе мира продолжается с 1840-х годов благодаря усилиям женских групп по построению мира, в котором споры разрешались бы мирным путем. И карикатура Херлуфа без трупа на слайде прекрасно показывает роль женщин в становлении мирного образования. В том числе, если говорить о более модерных подходах, очень много усилий приложила к популяризации идеи мирного образования Мария Монтессори. Современный мир движется в направлении развития культуры мира, что является результатом множественности различных форм мирного образования. Charter of the United Nations prescribes peaceful resolution of conflicts. However, propaganda of war makes a convincing case calling to fight for victory at any cost, threatening to punish cooperation with enemies. Of course, the propaganda don't tell you that it is impossible to win without losses, and it is better to make reasonable trade-offs at the negotiation table instead of taking insane losses. It is one of many arguments upholding critical perception of violence. There are others, like religious approaches. In Christianity, we say you shall not kill. In Islam, for example, killing violates peace of God. In Buddhism, it is like a form of painful passions, unacceptable form, etc., etc. Simple description of many wars waged by United States or Russia or other countries lead to conclusion that these wars were not just, nor necessary, nor beneficial. Portrayal of war in such way or as imminent, etc., is mythical, unrealistic, and rebuttal of all myths about just, necessary, beneficial, imminent wars. Rebuttal of all these myths you can find at the website worldbeyondwar.org. Important idea here is observation that modern economies are addicted to war. And here at the slide, you see a very illustrative and convincing educational source talking about story about militarism and about military-industrial complex addicted to war. It is easily accessible in internet. Also, there is a cover of the book Putin's Wars. And you see at this slide mention about a beautiful game Peacemaker. It is a game in which you could play as a leader of Israel or Palestine and try to implement policies leading to peace between these states according to two-state peaceful solution. And also here you see a title of a beautiful lesson developed by Quakers in Britain. Would you fight in Ukraine? It explains how from Ukrainian side you could see this war as resistance to Russian invasion, and from Russian side you could see this war as illegal and unjustifiable invasion to Ukraine. And therefore on Ukrainian side, you could be more inclined to fight, and from Russian side, you could be more inclined to be conscientious objector to military service. But of course, there are also conscientious objectors on Ukrainian side too. And all beauty and objectivity of this lesson is explanation, opportunity to people living not here, but in United Kingdom, to imagine themselves on place of people in Ukraine and in Russia, reading their stories and trying to make this choice for themselves. It is a very powerful educational tool. Итак, устав Организации Объединенных Наций предусматривает мирное решение конфликтов. Однако пропаганда войн на самом деле делает достаточно убедительные аргументы. Это когда призывает сражаться за победу любой ценой и даже угрожает наказывать за сотрудничество с врагами. Но, конечно, о чем пропаганда вам не говорит, это то, что невозможно победить без утрат, без потерь. И поэтому гораздо лучше делать разумные уступки за столом переговоров, чем идти на безумные жертвы для некой абсолютной победы. И это один из многих аргументов, который позволяет отстаивать критическое восприятие насилия. Есть много других аргументов в пользу критического восприятия насилия, от традиционных до новых. Это, например, религиозная критика насилия. Вот в христианстве, например, говорится «не убий». Философская критика. Относись к другому, как хотел бы, чтобы относились к тебе. Политическая критика мирных движений. Экономическая критика. Вот тут особенно важна идея того, что современные экономики просто больны войной. После Второй мировой войны возникший военно-промышленный комплекс, производящий огромное количество оружия, не хочет просто рассасываться, и необходимы новые войны для того, чтобы загружать его этими самыми задачами по рынкам сбыта оружия. И обычное описание многих войн, которые велись Соединенными Штатами или Россией, вот тут, например, вы видите хронологию войны, военных конфликтов при участии России после Второй мировой и обложку книги «Войны Путина». Такая достаточно критическая книга на эту тему. Обычное описание всех этих совершенно безобразных войн показывает, что они не были справедливые, они не были полезные, они не были неизбежными, они не были необходимыми. И знание этого позволяет относиться к войне объективно и принимать сознательный выбор, участвовать в войне или нет. Вот, скажем, тут есть обложка курса «Стали бы вы сражаться в Украине» от квакеров в Британии. И в этом курсе человек может почитать жизненные истории подростка из России и из Украины, достаточно типичные, перед которым стоит дилемма призыва на военную службу. И из этих историй видно, что вообще-то человек в России скорее увидит, что эта война, мягко говоря, братоубийственная, несправедливая. А человек в Украине, наоборот, скорее увидит, что это защита, все, что ему дорого, от ужасного насилия. И этот урок объясняет, почему человек в Украине скорее пойдет воевать, а человек в России скорее примет решение об отказе от военной службы по мотивам совести. Надо сказать, что этот урок очень объективный, потому что там, как и в реальности, собственно говоря, эти жизненные истории позволяют понять, и почему люди в Украине тоже в некоторых ситуациях по мотивам совести принимают решение не принимать участие в войне. И есть такая очень старая традиционная идея, что так, когда все люди откажутся воевать, войн в мире больше не будет. Это может казаться нереалистичным сегодня, но когда-то казалось нереалистичным и то, что люди будут соблюдать какие-то законы на войне и будут вести переговоры во время войны. Сейчас это уже реальность. И, значит, если мы смогли заставить воинов вести себя более цивилизованно, мы можем и увеличить количество людей, не желающих принимать участие в войне и оказывающих влияние на свои правительства с требованием прекратить как минимум незаконные по международному праву военные действия, отводить войска и садиться за стол переговоров. Вот в этом идея, в том, чтобы мирное движение, гражданское общество требовало справедливости более громко и добивалось шагов к миру. Здесь на этом слайде вы видите достаточно знаменитый кодекс Addicted to War. Это значит больные войной, как раз вот о том, как создавался этот военно-промышленный комплекс, политика постоянных войн США, войны Путина, я уже упоминал. Опять же, кстати, интересно, что в России недавно выпустили такое учебное пособие, которое называется «Все войны России». Оно призвано создавать некое патриотическое одобрение войнам. И идея там в том, что где-то из 500 войн, где-то 300 Россия выиграла. Но о потерях особенно не говорится. А ведь эти потери показывают, что, может быть, кто-то там из царей и выиграл, но люди-то мирные проиграли. Эти потери не оправдывают никакую войну. И вместо таких вот пособий, прославляющих войну, необходимы хорошие книги и курсы, объясняющие, что война – это не что-то, чем должно государство заниматься, а что-то, что нужно постепенно и мягко исключать из международной политики. A very important thing in peace education is learning about possibility of personal position in war resistance, such as human right to conscientious objection to military service. By the way, I many times hear a question: is it timely to defend the internationally recognized human right to conscientious objection to military service when your country mobilizes to stand against fascist neighbors? And the question here have a simple answer. Of course, it is timely always. Because it is a question of conscience. Right to freedom of conscience, belief and religion enshrined in the Article 18 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights is non-derogable because in time of war it is especially important to give people who continue their nonviolent way of life, ready to continue it even in time of great pains. They continue this nonviolent way of life, preserving it, waiting for the time when others will return to peaceful life. They preserve a nonviolent way of life to avoid cooperation with militaries, with oppressors, with aggressors, to minimize violence in war and insist on minimization of violence, to call all sides for compliance with human rights and international humanitarian law, and so on. There is always a role for people with conscience and nonviolent principles principles a role of stopping the war even during the war. And that's why freedom of conscience is human right, which is not derogable, especially in time of war. People who developed conscientious objection to military service can explain others that resistance to violence is possible, and portrayal of enemy as evil is not totally correct. Of course, some very bad people could be in power, but even when Hitler was in power, nonviolent actions of civil resistance helped people to avoid participation in crimes of Nazi regime and to liberate themselves and others, like Danish nonviolent resistance to Nazi, like protests of wives of Jews, which led to their liberation from imprisonment. When wives, simple women, forced Nazi regime to make some exceptions from their anti-human genocidal politics of Holocaust. Civil disobedience, knowledge about it, and understanding of its power is, and understanding that it is important human right is a part of peace education. Важным элементом мирного образования является обучение гражданскому неповиновению. Понимание того, что противостоять агрессии, диктатуре, насилию можно и без насилия, без агрессии. И таким образом минимизировать страдания людей. Ведь при любом насильственном сопротивлении, как и при любом насильственном несправедливом действии, всегда есть посторонняя жертва. И также мы должны понимать, что есть право человека на отказ от военной службы по мотивам совести. Вот я часто слышу вопрос: своевременно ли защищать международно признанное право человека на отказ от военной службы по мотивам совести, когда страна мобилизуется, чтобы дать отпор соседям-фашистам? Так вот, особенно в такое время, время войны, важно помнить о том, что это самое право на отказ от военной службы по мотивам совести, предусмотренное статьей 18 Международного пакта о гражданских и политических правах, оно является неотступным, то есть от него нельзя отступить во время ситуации военного положения. И это право гарантирует, что люди, убеждения которых основаны на ведении ненасильственного образа жизни, должны быть защищены. Они то мирное население, которое нельзя превращать в воинов. И они имеют свою роль. Они могут останавливать войну, они могут требовать от правительств соблюдения на каждой стороне, требовать от правительств соблюдения прав человека и норм международного гуманитарного права. Они могут добиваться прекращения действий, которые противоречат международному праву, и требовать, чтобы агрессия прекращалась и стороны возвращались за стол переговоров. Они могут объяснять, что образ врага как тотального зла всегда некая фикция, даже если при власти очень плохие люди. Понятно, что когда, скажем, мы говорим о некой гитлеровской Германии, как пример, эта ситуация ужасная. И те военные преступления, которые происходят, их невозможно терпеть. Но в то же время, даже в такой ситуации мы имеем примеры ненасильственного сопротивления Дании нацистской агрессии и массового отказа от сотрудничества с агрессорами. Мы имеем примеры множества ненасильственных революций и исследований Эрики Черновет, которая показывает, что эффективность ненасильственного сопротивления гораздо больше, чем эффективность насильственного сопротивления. Была ситуация, когда жены заключенных нацистами евреев отстояли своих мужей и заставили нацистов отпустить их. Это был пример ненасильственного сопротивления, который даже такой ужасный режим, как нацистский, заставил немножко пересмотреть эту преступную политику Холокоста. То есть ненасилие – это очень мощный способ гражданского действия, и знать примеры и методы, как оно действует, нужно для того, чтобы сопротивляться насилию и войне без насилия и таким образом строить культуру мира. Сознательный отказ от военной службы от насилия, как говорил Махатма Ганди, иногда требует гораздо больше усилий, чем ведение войны. Ганди вообще был убежден, что насилие лучше, чем бездействие. Но ненасильственное действие гораздо лучше, и когда есть знания, когда есть образование, гораздо эффективнее, чем насильственное действие. Поэтому обучение гражданскому неповиновению – важный аспект гражданского образования. Few words about forms of peace education in formal education. Usually, almost all curriculums in formal education give basic ideas of peace, conflict, nonviolence. It creates safe space to develop skills of nonviolent communication and conflict management. Also in the formal education, we see, especially in Western countries, a lot of specialized studies of peace and conflict. Here at the slide, you could see some great pages from Peace Education Network Teach Peace Pack. For example, teaching what is peace, it focuses on example of nonviolent resistance to colonialism by Mahatma Gandhi and like-minded people. And talking about conflict resolution, it is famous tale of two mules. Also, there are examples of conscientious objection. On example of Catholic objector Franz Egerstetter, which was executed by a Nazi as so-called deserter. And for example, stories of nonviolent resistance, stories about non-discriminate weapons like drones, in a lesson about peaceful sky. So Peace Education Network is a great community of peace educators, and Teach Peace Pack, I recommend it to you because it is wonderful educational source for those who are starting to teach peace and those who need good educational materials. Also here there are some books concerning pedagogics and psychology of nonviolence in educational process, research and report about peace education in formal schools in the United Kingdom, curriculum Culture of Peace and Nonviolence from one of Russian universities, and a monograph Teaching and Learning for Comprehensive Citizenship. Коротко несколько примеров мирного образования в формальном образовании. Этот компонент всегда присутствует в формальном образовании. Собственно говоря, любая программа базового школьного образования, да и университетские программы тоже включают, постепенно раскрывают основные идеи мира, конфликта, ненасилия, что это такое. Опять же, создается безопасное пространство развития навыков общения и решения конфликтов без насилия, вот та самая образовательная среда комфортная. И также существуют формальные образовательные программы, направленные на изучение мира и конфликта. Конечно, для будущих медиаторов, для будущих дипломатов и для будущих эдукаторов, тех, кто будет учить других. На этом слайде вы можете видеть пакет образовательных материалов британской сети мирного образования. Например, что такое мир, раскрывающий эту тему на примере ненасильственного движения Махатмы Ганди за независимость Индии. Или, скажем, урок про решение конфликтов без насилия на примере притчи о двух мулах. Кстати, есть масса интересных историй, притч о мирном решении конфликтов. Там, например, известная притча про апельсин. Да? Значит, дети не поделили апельсин, а потом выяснилось, что одному нужна цедра, другой нужна мякоть. И мама помогла разобраться в том, что эти потребности на самом деле можно согласовать. Ну, вот похожая история с мулами. Рекомендую для использования. Вообще было бы здорово подобное пособие переводить. И тут еще несколько книг, например, доклад «Мирное образование в формальных школах», «Педагогика и психология ненасилия в образовательных процессах». Вот, скажем, в одном из российских университетов была разработана программа «Культура мира и ненасилия» еще тогда, когда демократические тенденции в российском образовании не были настолько угнетены, как сейчас. Или, например, монография изучения всестороннего гражданства. Всестороннее гражданство – это гражданство не только для своей страны или своей местной общины, а гражданство как гражданина, ответственного перед природой, гражданина, ответственного перед всем человечеством. То есть это осознание тех ответственностей и свобод, которые немного шире, чем наша повседневная жизнь. Это вот всестороннее гражданство. И в этой монографии приводятся чрезвычайно ценные примеры этого. Also, in cultural institutions, peace education is widely practiced. For example, in museums and exhibitions dedicated to peace, to nonviolent resistance, to tragic and criminal sides of war. Of course, there are a lot of commemorations of past wars, and in many situations they are tend to collaborate glory, but it is impossible to ignore war crimes. It is impossible to ignore death, and even when the Museum of War is created to propagate militarism and patriotism, it inevitably teaches that war is death. There are also anti-war museums, like this anti-war museum in Germany at this slide. Other form of peace education in cultural institutions is peace libraries, whole libraries, or special collections and educational projects. For example, a library of JFK, Kennedy's library, has educational course based on a letter of teenager to Kennedy, talking about consequences of nuclear war and calling for reconciliation with Soviet Union. Theaters, art galleries, and other cultural institutions also promote peace. Если говорить об учреждениях культуры, они тоже часто могут быть пространством или организаторами программ, проектов мирного образования. Скажем, это музеи, выставки, посвященные миру, ненасильственному сопротивлению, трагическим и уголовным сторонам войны. Даже если это некий музей войны, вот как на постсоветском пространстве, всякие музей победы, вот идея часто в том, чтобы изобразить некую славу и использовать историческую память для так называемого воспитания патриотизма, чтобы юноши и девушки мечтали стать солдатами. Но даже такая коммеморация, она не может избежать того, чтобы показать военное преступление и страдания. Нельзя игнорировать тот факт, что война – это смерть. И даже такие вот музеи, где не учитывается необходимость мирного образования, даже они в какой-то мере служат ему. Но есть вот такие музеи, как, скажем, вот на этом слайде фотография, германский антикригсмузеум. Это специализированный музей, посвященный самым трагическим сторонам Первой и Второй мировых войн. Его цель как раз в том, чтобы давать антивоенное образование, знание того, почему нельзя допускать вновь войн. Другой пример – это библиотеки и коллекции мирной литературы, образовательные проекты библиотек. Например, библиотека Кеннеди в США проводит образовательный курс для подростков, основанный на изучение письма тинейджеру к президенту Кеннеди о том, что вот этот парень, школьник, не представляет себе, как ему и, может быть, его однолеткам в Советском Союзе удастся пережить ядерный взрыв, потому что он же уничтожит всю жизнь на Земле, и школьник требует от президента, что вы должны найти путь к примирению. И это, конечно, очень полезный образовательный курс. Кроме того, мирное образование может проводиться в театрах, культурных галереях, есть и специальные пьесы, можно вспомнить и знаменитые книги, значит, «На Западном фронте без перемен» и так далее. Да? Also, talking about informal peace education, we can talk about self-education by books, films, etc. I remember my impressions after watching a film Gandhi, or, for example, this book, Confronting Conflict, a first aid kit for handling conflicts by Friedrich Laszlo. Gives knowledge about escalation of conflicts and the difference between inclination to escalate conflicts and conflict competency, readiness of organize communication in such a way to avoid or de-escalate conflicts without giving up some legitimate interests. For example, Red Cross, the International Committee of Red Cross, published some educational videos about great harms of nuclear weapons, advocating abolishment of nuclear weapons, such as this video, Will You Survive a Nuclear Attack? Also, there are online games For example, civics is well-known American website with a lot of educational games. For example, a game which concerns counteraction of disinformation in social networks, or a game which gives opportunity to player to imagine herself or himself at place of decision makers in foreign policy, and so on. There are textbook, handbook for nonviolent campaigns, famous textbook issued by War Resisters International, based on 100, actually more than 100 methods of nonviolent resistance developed by Gene Sharp. Found in history, described, because nonviolent resistance have a very rich history, even from the time of pre-modern era. Also, there are trainings, workshops, other events. Today we have a workshop and probably a discussion after a workshop. And of course, joining peace movement or human rights movement or other nonviolent action, you can learn in action how people do it. It is one of way of learning in practice. Here you see also a cover of program of World Beyond War, Peace Education and Action for Impact, which combines this learning and practical action. To overcome structural violence, we need to remove militarist indoctrination from curricula. Examples of this could be, for example, instruction of Russian Alliance of Teachers, which helps educators and students to avoid so-called patriotic hour in Russian schools, which is apologetics of war in Ukraine. Or, for example, there is a campaign, demilitarized education in the United Kingdom. It demands cessation of participation of research universities in arms trade. Basically, we need to learn war without militarist indoctrination. We need to learn war objectively, to learn as a problem, not as a solution of social problems. Пожалуй, я сейчас вернусь сюда и скажу на русском пару слов о неформальном мирном образовании. Оно включает самообучение по книгам, фильмам и так далее. Значит, например, я могу рекомендовать фильм «Ганди». Очень впечатляющий фильм об индийском ненасильственном освобождении. Или вот, скажем, книги Фридриха Глазла. Эта книга «Confronting Conflict» достаточно редко, но знаменитая модель эскалации конфликтов, 9 ступеней эскалации Глазла, должен знать каждый, кто хочет немного разбираться в конфликтологии. короткие образовательные видео. Например, Международный комитет Красного Креста выпустил вот такое вот видео «Переживете ли вы ядерный взрыв?». Красный Крест – большой адвокат ликвидации ядерного оружия, договора о запрещении ядерного оружия, который вступил в силу 2 года назад. И это видео как раз показывает, что вот многие попытки производителей ядерного оружия приучить людей к тому, что вот если сбросят бомбу, ничего страшного не будет, вы это как-то переживете, на самом деле нет. Или, например, образовательные игры. Вот недавно была выпущена игра, она доступна на Steam, о том, как люди переживали российскую оккупацию территории на Киевщине. Достаточно ярко показана трагическая реальность будней тех дней и страдания тех, кому удалось или не удалось это пережить. Пособие для ненасильственных кампаний антивоенного интернационала. Знаменитая книга, учебник, созданная на основе исследований Джина Шарпа о более чем сотне форм ненасильственного сопротивления насилию из глубокой древности до наших дней. Или, например, вот эта вот программа «Мирное образование» и действия для того, чтобы достичь успеха. Значит, такая комбинация теоретического и практического обучения. И для того, чтобы преодолеть структурное насилие, необходимо исключить милитаристическую индоктринацию из учебных программ. Вот, например, как Российский альянс учителей помогает учителям и ученикам отказываться от патриотического часа. Такая обязательная программа, оправдывающая войну в Украине. Понятное дело, против международного права. Значит, или, например, английская компания «Демилитаризация образования» требует прекращения участия исследовательских университетов в торговле оружием. Мы должны изучать войну без милитаристической индоктринации для того, чтобы понять, что война – это не решение проблем социальных или каких-либо еще. Война – это проблема, которая сама по себе нуждается в решении. So, to conclude, another question which I thinking a lot and possibly other peace educations too, a question for many peace educators. Is it possible to criticize the war and army without disinformation, defeatism, without becoming useful idiots? Of course it is possible when you are spreading knowledge, not some sort of ideology. What is the difference between knowledge and ideology? Ideology is a set of teachings which includes something faith-based, something irrational. And knowledge is always based on practical understanding. And we need to criticize war for real evils of war. And we need to model better world without wars in practical, in realistic way. And we need to do it on all sides of wars. Only on one side, it will hardly stop the war. When you are teaching peace on all sides, it undermines all war efforts and increases inclination of people towards peace process. further democratic transformations need a development of knowledge and skills of peaceful citizens necessary for critical analysis and nonviolent resolution of conflicts, as well as divestment from militarism. To stop all wars, we need to learn how to live in peace. And peace education is an important component of civics, ideally a replacement of military patriotic upbringing harmful to culture of peace. We need to replace culture of conflict and culture of violence with culture of peace. That is a final mission of peace education, which I hope we could achieve together. Перехожу к выводам. Многие эдукаторы, особенно работающие в сфере мирного образования, сталкиваются с вопросом, можно ли критиковать войну и армию без дезинформации и капитулянства, не становясь полезными идиотами. И ответ на этот вопрос, несмотря на все сомнения, позитивный. Конечно, можно. Для этого надо именно передавать практические знания, а не идеологию. В чем разница между идеологией и знанием? Идеология всегда имеет элементы, основанные на некой иррациональной вере. Знания всегда основаны на практическом понимании. И если информация о вреде войны правильно, если мирное образование проводится не где-то на одной стороне и не в пользу кого-то одного, а со всех сторон и в пользу общего блага, в такой ситуации вы не будете полезными идиотами, вы будете мирным человеком, который помогает другим людям стать мирными людьми и требовать от власти то, что принадлежит каждому по праву, потому что каждый человек имеет право на мир. Требовать прекращения незаконных и жестоких действий, требовать мирных переговоров и институциональных гарантий мира. Поэтому для продолжения демократических трансформаций необходимо развивать знания и компетенции мирных граждан, полезные для критического анализа и решения конфликтов без насилия, а также для преодоления милитаризма. Мирное образование является важнейшим компонентом гражданского образования, в идеале заменой военно-патриотическому образованию, вредному для культуры мира. На этом слайде изображены некоторые моменты мирного образования из Украины, из Грузии, из Молдовы, из Армении, из Азербайджана. И эти моменты показывают, что можно и нужно изучать peace, изучать мир, даже в ситуации, когда продолжается насилие. Потому что если мы не научимся жить мирно, мы будем продолжать страдать от своего невежества. Конечная цель мирного образования – это дать людям знания, достаточные для замещения архаической культуры насилия, культуры бесконечных конфликтов, современной прогрессивной культурой мира и ненасилия. Thank you for your patience, because I made this presentation very long. Probably it will make it more useful later for Russian speakers. And now I would like to remind us that there will be a floor for questions later, but we must to start from other speakers. Again, sorry for taking a lot of time, but we have 2 hours for next presentations and for questions and answers. It will be, I'm sure, a very interesting discussion and presentations. Yeah, sorry for taking so long time. I hope that Alex Belik joined us or not. Алекс Белик, вы с нами? Yeah, it is a problem. Alex didn't join us. So I propose to continue and give a floor for presentation to Ellis Brooks. He is a peace education coordinator at Quakers in Britain. Ellis, please, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yurii, and hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Shropshire, which is a rural part of England. Compliments to you, Yurii, for so much erudition in 2 languages. I apologize, I only have English, so I'll be speaking in English and my slides are in English as well. If I say anything that you don't understand, then please just shout and interrupt me, and I'll do my best to break it down some more. So, as I said, my work is in peace education, and I want to explain a bit more about what that means and how I think it can contribute and does contribute to the prevention of war, how we can challenge that cultural violence that Yurii was talking about, that normalizes war. I can't speak with authority about the conflict in Ukraine or in other parts of the world. So I'll be speaking more about education in my context in Britain, but therefore how other conflicts are perceived in Britain. Before I get going, I should say that I work for Quakers in Britain, as Yurii mentioned. And for those who don't know, Quakers are a church that started in Britain in the 17th century and spread out internationally. Quakers, in fact, sometimes call themselves a peace church, and they cherish what they call their peace testimony. That began when Quakers were a minority in England that were being persecuted, and they petitioned the king, and they said, we're totally committed to peace and non-violence. We will not use carnal weapons, sinful weapons, if you like. And they cited lots of the Bible, lots of scripture to explain why they would never fight in war. And you might think of other religions where there have been different movements and faith-based decisions for making a commitment to peace like that. For the Quakers at the time, it was actually partly an act of self-preservation. They were sort of saying to the king, we're not a threat, please stop locking us up, please stop persecuting us. But over the centuries, it turned into a bit more of an active commitment, a commitment to action for peace. So you had Quakers like Benjamin Lay in the top left, who he plunged a dagger into a Bible to shock other Quakers who owned slaves in America, to shock them out of what he saw as that sinful behavior. Like William Roch, he had a stash of bayonets, but he sank them into the bottom of the sea rather than let either the British or the Americans use them to fight the American Revolutionary War. You had Quakers like Rachel Cadbury or Corder Catchpole, who in World War I refused to fight in the army, although they did join what was called the Friends Ambulance Unit to try and heal people. Although in the end, Corder actually decided he couldn't even do that because he might contribute to the war effort. You've got Quakers like Helen Stephen in the bottom left, who paddled a canoe across a loch in Scotland very early in the morning to try and sabotage a British nuclear-armed submarine. She didn't get inside, but she did throw quite a lot of equipment into the bottom of the loch, a bit like William Roch. And you've got Bernard Agona, who is a Quaker in Kenya and did lots of work recently to prevent violence around the Kenyan elections, doing lots of peace-building work to address the concerns of ordinary people. So across the centuries, Quakers have done a lot of work for peace. And in saying all that, you might think that I'm proselytizing for Quakers, but I'm not really. In fact, I'm not a Quaker myself. But the reason I mention these are examples of stories of action for peace. because I think stories are one of the ways that we educate for peace. We show these inspirational but also challenging stories. Another manifestation of Quakers' witness for peace I should mention today is that Quakers are doing what they're calling citizen diplomacy, which is actually a tradition that goes back to the Cold War. So ordinary British Quakers reaching out to people in Russia to have that kind of grassroots dialogue. You can read more about that kind of work on the Quaker website, which I've posted in the chat. Another phrase that Quakers use is search out whatever in your own way of life may contain seeds of war. The seeds of war in our own lives. Someone mentioned in the chat earlier that peace starts locally rather than globally. So again, looking at my context in Britain, let's think a little bit about that. Here's an image that we use in peace education in the classroom. I'll pause for a moment for you to look at it. Everything in this image is something that does happen, that has happened on the streets of Britain. So, some examples. Britain does welcome some refugees from conflicts around the world. You can see them arriving in the top left, and lots of British people have a cultural welcome around that. But there is a lot of stigma, there is a lot of government resistance to that. Yurii already mentioned militarisation of education, so the government spends money, particularly in poor areas of Britain, on things like cadet forces, like junior military activities, building interest. Britain is a major arms exporter, like Russia, like the USA. So that's part of the British economy, that's part of everyday life, even if it's sometimes behind closed doors. And we've got acts of remembrance. We're about 2 weeks away from Remembrance Day in Britain, Armistice Day from World War I, the 11th of November, when red poppies will be laid around the country, remembering the soldiers who died in war. Although in Britain, we also have the white poppy to remember all victims of war and to call for an end of war. There's a great lesson there in exploring with young people what poppy they are drawn to and why. But as you can see, if you look at British society, there are many seeds of war. So how can education respond to that? I think it does need to respond because we know that education by itself doesn't stop a society being warlike. If you look at Nazi Germany, if you look at Cambodia before the rise of the Khmer Rouge, if you look at Russia today, these were not uneducated societies. So there's something else you need besides just learning for jobs and the economy. You need to learn for peace. Some ideas about what that could involve. I think it needs a combination of things to get informed civic responsibility, to understand what educating for peace might be. So you need knowledge, you need intellectual rigor. But if you do that by itself, then it raises lots of these questions without a rudder. They don't have anywhere to go. Things like, what if I do disagree? What would I actually do? What if I'm emotionally hurt by this issue? What if other people are hurt? Intellect alone, knowledge alone, doesn't address that. So we also need emotional engagement, and we need ethical reflection. And that's how you sort of get this secure, informed civic responsibility. And that's how you have a kind of foundation to take action in the world. To break that down a little bit, to get the kind of empathy, the human story, I would use story. You've got Misha in the top right. He's a Russian conscientious objector. You've got Ruslan, who's a CEO from Ukraine. You've got Pussy Riot, who I would frame as non-violent resistors. You've got children's stories like this one, The Day the War Came, which is about a child refugee, and real world stories like Aimel, whose father was killed by a drone strike in Afghanistan. It can be hard sometimes to overcome the psychic numbing of big stories of war, of the statistics, but human stories like this, I think, can make a difference. Yurii already mentioned this, actually, but one of the activities that we use is Would You Fight in the War in Ukraine? And we tell students a story bit by bit, beginning with you're a young man, maybe you're 19 years old, you're a basketball player. And gradually we build up the story about what the government is saying. The government is saying that you have an enemy that's threatening you, threatening your identity, threatening your family, that a law has been brought in for conscription. It's only quite late in the story that the students discover whether the country that they're in is Russia or Ukraine. So they can see the parallels and they can see the dilemmas. So that's really putting the student in the story, but also getting that ethical dilemma that I mentioned. I talked about needing knowledge, and that means studying history, but we can sometimes get trapped in telling one story of history, the story of the victors, a simple story of history. I think British classrooms are very guilty of this, especially around World War II, or especially around the British Empire. But we can tell different stories without endorsing one or another. And this is a new practice by organizations like Parallel Histories, used about conflicts like the one in Northern Ireland, or Palestine and Israel, or Pakistan and India, where there are very strong stories and truths on both sides, and sort of honoring and empathizing with those. And like I say, building the knowledge in that triangle we saw before. Another image from the world of peace studies that a lot of people in Britain have found quite useful when trying to grapple with what's happening in Ukraine is the idea of the hourglass to represent the progress of a war or a conflict. You can see that there's space to maneuver before the war. There's time for peace building, for change. But as we get closer to actual violence, the space shrinks, the choices get more limited, and that's for the individual and it's for the group. But after the conflict, it gets wider again. So that is a really useful sort of classroom image to explore and kind of map a conflict onto. Yurii already showed a diagram like this, mapping how a conflict escalates, and that could be an individual or a group, a national thing. For time, I'm going to skip that one, but I'll finish with this.
By the way, Ellis, you could explain, because I know that Alex will, unfortunately, he have unstable connection, so other presenters have a little more of time. So you could tell us all ideas concerning your presentation. It is great, very interesting.
Okay, thanks, Yurii. I'll talk about this one briefly then. So this is another model from the world of conflict resolution. You can imagine it as two mountaintops with people shouting at each other, the different positions. And you can see the positions don't overlap, they're separate. You might, to give the example of Northern Ireland, one position might be Northern Ireland should be part of the United Kingdom with Britain. And the other position might be Northern Ireland must be independent of Britain and should be part of the nation of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. Those positions don't overlap, they are different. There's not an in-between, but a lot of the peace initiatives that thrived in Northern Ireland in the last 2 decades were based on not focusing on those different positions, but on the human needs. Needs like your children being safe, being able to go to school without fear, needs like jobs, needs like equality, needs like freedom of religion. And when those were being addressed, it didn't mean that people forgot about their different ideas, their different stories, but there was less kind of drive for armed conflict. And what I want to leave you with is, from my experience with working with young people, they are phenomenal peacemakers and peace builders, given the chance, given the opportunity. We shared with them the story of the 2 mules on the left, who this is quite an old poster made by the Quakers in the 1920s. And the young people love telling the story of the two mules and how they find their own solution, a win-win solution to a conflict. But they can put it into practice as well. The young people on the right of the screen are peer mediators, young people trained in conflict resolution to do it for other young people. And some of them in this school in London are so successful at doing it in the school that they take their conflict resolution skills out into the community and provide conflict resolution for adults, neighborhood disputes, and so on. So we're all peacemakers given the chance, and education is an essential part of that. And looking at the news can be very bleak, and there is a lot to be sorrowful about. But equally, we know that there are parents and teachers, whether in Britain or Ukraine or in Russia right now, who perhaps quietly, and perhaps when they're not being watched, they are educating for peace, and they are teaching not to hate in whatever way they can. So if people can do that in those circumstances, then I hope we can do it in our own context. Thank you everyone for listening. And I'll hand back to you, Yurii.
Thank you, Ellis. I must say that I learned from my Telegram messenger that Alex Belik has unstable internet connection in Georgia and can't join us. So unfortunately, he didn't saw your beautiful presentation, but you know, I very quickly will just share this website. You see on my screen a website of Russian movement of conscientious objectors. Their address is stoparmy.org. I put it into chat. And here there are a lot of materials how they learn young people about human right to conscientious objection to military service, about constitutional right to alternative non-military service in replacement for military service. And also Alex already made presentation this summer during the webinar Conscientious Objection in Europe Today with focus on the war in Ukraine. I also put into chat link to this webinar. It is posted on the website worldbeyondwar.org. And here is a video on YouTube, and also links to slides. So you can just access this materials later. I will repeat it in Russian and then we'll give a floor to next speaker. Я должен сказать, что есть такая неприятная новость. К сожалению, Алекс Белик не может к нам присоединиться. Сейчас у него в Грузии нестабильная интернет-связь. Но вы можете зайти на их сайт stoparmy.org. Вот это движение сознательных отказчиков от военной службы, и у них достаточно много обучающих материалов на тему сознательного отказа от военной службы и конституционного права на замену военной службы альтернативной невоенной в России. И кроме того, Алекс делал презентацию на вебинаре летом, как раз рассказывал о том, как они обучают людей этой тематике. На сайте worldbeyondwar.org можно найти вот этот вот вебинар. И тут есть не только видео, но даже и линки на презентации. Thank you again for Alex for a beautiful presentation, and now I give a floor to Phill Gittins. He have PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies. He is Master of Education with 20 years of educators and researchers experience. Education Director at the International Network World Beyond War, aimed at abolition of war. Please, floor is yours, Phill.
Thank you so much, Yurii, and lovely to see you all. And thank you so much, Ellis, for your presentation. I learned a lot about Quakers, so thank you so much for that. So Ellis is in Shropshire. I'm from Shropshire, but I'm actually in Bolivia currently. And what I'd like to talk about is a program called Peace, Education and Action for Impact. But before doing that, what I'd really, really like to know is who's here. So can we try something? You could do this in a couple of ways. Can you write in the chat, please, your name and where you're joining us from? So just so we can get to kind of know each other. So Phill, Bolivia, but I'm from the UK. Another way we could do it, if you feel comfortable and if you want to, is that you can put your camera on so that we can see you, if you can, if you do have good internet connection, etc. And I'm going to ask a question. Okay, great. And I'm going to ask a question, and if the answer is yes, you can either put your thumbs up like this, or you can wave, or you can do a reaction. Here we go. Let's do a reaction like this. Okay.
Phill, one moment. I will translate it to Russian. But I see that there are not many people Russian speaking, but I will try anyway. Phill просит всех написать в чате ваши имена и откуда вы. Я вот для примера напишу, что я Юрий, и я из Украины. Секундочку. Конечно, сейчас у нас тут гораздо больше народу пришло англоязычного, но все-таки, а вдруг?
Okay, so you tell me, Yurii, when you want me to continue.
Yeah, you can continue, Phill, please.
Okay, super, thank you. Okay, so I'll ask you a question, and if the answer is yes, you can put your hands up, wave, or do a reaction. Okay. So put your hands up if you are currently in Europe right now. Okay, so we've got kind of, okay. There we go. Put your hands up if you're not in Europe right now. Okay, cool. Put your hands up. Here we go, this is subjective. If you're a young person. Okay, great. Put your hands up if you think that more can be done to promote peace and challenge war in the world. Okay, cool. Thank you. So what do we see here? We see here that we have great diversity. We have great diversity in terms of younger and not so young, in terms of people from Europe, not from Europe. But what we also have, the Baha'i faith, you know, unity and diversity. We have unity. We are all here for a common goal in terms of our belief around much more can be done to promote positive peace and challenge war. So thank you for that. We did that, one, because it's nice to know who's here. So my task now is to talk about a program, and I'm going to share my screen if that's okay, Yurii. Here we go. Can you see my screen? If you can, put thumbs up. Yes, perfect. So I wanted to talk about a program called Peace, Education and Action for Impact. Before doing that, it would be remiss if we did not share some resources. For those of you that don't know, World Beyond War is a global grassroots organization with membership in 193 countries, and we try and differentiate ourselves and contribute to the peace building work being done around the world in two ways. One is global in scope, and two is against the war system. So not just war that's happening in Yemen, in certain countries, but against the institution of war. So this means addressing what happens before, during, and after. Before is the ongoing preparation for war, and I'm going to talk about that shortly. The immediacy of war is what happens when the bombs are dropped. And after is the remnants of war, which we see today in many different parts around the world. So there's a little bit about World Beyond War. We work in two areas: education, which is the part that I work on, and action. But as Yurii has rightly said, and we're going to talk about today in the program, really, in order for social change to happen, we need both reflection and action to work together, praxis. So this is what we do. We won the 2021 US Peace Prize for our creative approaches to global challenges such as war, nuclear weapons, and climate change. And also before that, the Global Educators Challenge, based on our content and our courses and things like this. We have online courses. We have a seminal book. We have fact sheets. We have a website called Mapping Militarism. If you want to see what countries are doing around the world in terms of military spending, go on to World Beyond War, and you have a visual map, etc. That's some of the work that we do. Right? We don't have time now to share all of it. But this is a good resource for people that are interested in working in the area of peace education. If you go on to World Beyond War resources, and we have a whole database where we've created and curated thousands of resources related to anti-war and pro-peace work. And those two terms, anti-war and pro-peace, I will talk about a little bit shortly because they're very, very important. So, and you can put in, okay, I want to find out something about environment, and it'll come up a whole host of resources. Another great resource is what we developed in collaboration with our colleagues at the Global Campaign for Peace Education, is a Study War No More guide. If you go on to World Beyond War and put in Study War No More, you will find a whole host of lesson plans and resources, etc., which are tailored to educators interested in guiding conversations around issues related to peace building, such as reconciliation, a culture of peace, non-violence, among others, the role of women in peace building, etc. And we'll be updating this shortly. So there's some resources about World Beyond War. I wanted to talk about this program, Peace Education and Action for Impact, which is a program which contributes to youth-led, intergenerational, and cross-cultural peace building. And I'm going to speak about the specifics of that. But before speaking about the specifics, I'll take a step back and talk about the rationale and what were some of the reasons behind why we wanted to start this program. And this is a good starting point. Equipping young people with the skills, knowledge, and resources to both promote peace and oppose war is one of the largest and most important global challenges facing humanity. I'm going to break that down. So let's look at peace. Why is peace important? Well, we now know that we cannot achieve sustainable development, which is the world's global goals that all of member states and human beings should be working towards, without peace. The UN rightly says there can be no sustainable development, there can be no peace without sustainable development, there could be no sustainable development without peace. There's a two-way relationship between peace and sustainable development. Part of the reason for that is because when there's violence, it directs attention away from more productive activities such as quality education, global health, and things like this. Violence around the world now costs us about 14 trillion. We're now at a 30-year high in terms of violence. 2 billion people around the world are at risk of conflict and violence around the world. Another part related to peace is this idea of the democratization of peace, or as Johan Galton, one of the fathers of peace studies, would say, everybody has a role to play in peace building. Now that's shifted over the years. It used to be, it's the role of the UN, but now we know this whole idea, and congratulations to Yurii and others for putting this together, the idea of a culture of peace. Part of that means that we're all implicated in terms of peace building. And I also say this as well, we're all implicated in terms of war, in the sense that one of the biggest challenges, I think, in the peace building field is that we need to stop thinking of war happening out there in faraway countries. It's prepared in global north countries. And we really need to kind of be aware of that and try and develop empathy around that, which is a big challenge, I think, for the peace building field. So that's one issue related to promoting peace. But let's have a look. What is the situation with regards to peace and war around the world? Well, war is the biggest challenge from our perspective to sustainable peace. Let's take a look at the facts. 180 million people died in wars in the 20th century. it's now costing the global economy 16 trillion to contain economic violence around the world, to contain violence, sorry. It's estimated also about 10 trillion of that can be attributed to war in particular. If you put that into perspective, 2 trillion is physically spent on preparing for war, the military, etc. each year. Half of that comes from the US. If you put that into perspective, the research suggests that it would cost the world about 30 billion to end global starvation on the planet. This is why World Beyond War has this global campaign, and our 3% of military spending, 3% of military spending, isn't that crazy? 3% of military spending around the world could end starvation on the planet. Well, what's this contributed to? Well, we now see a 340% increase in battlefield deaths around the world, 340%, and a 30-year high in violence around the world. And of course, the refugee crisis has direct links back to war. So war is the leading cause of homelessness and the refugee crisis. One of the top causes of the environmental crisis around the world. Not a lot of people know that, you know, who's the biggest polluter on the planet and biggest user of fossil fuels? The military, and in particularly the US military. So if we want to make progress with regards to sustainable peace, we have to think about addressing war and abolishing war. But when we think about promoting sustainable peace and abolishing war, there is no viable approach that does not include the role of young people. Now, this has always been the case. Gandhi, many, many years back, said, if we want to reach peace in the world, we have to start with young people. Well, that's always been the case, but it's particularly the case now. Now, we have more young people on the planet than ever before in the whole of history. So if we're not leveraging the skills, knowledge, resources, creativity of young people, we're obviously missing out. The good news is that we have 3 UN resolutions, which have been brought out in the last 5 years, which says member states need to step up their game and engage young people more in peace building. The bad news is that despite youth participation being a demographic, moral imperative and democratic imperative, young people are often the missing piece in peace building. They're still overlooked in terms of peace research, peace policy, and peace practice. So while young people are important, every person has a role to play in peace building. So what we need to think about is intergenerational work, which engages young people and not so young people. So here's some of the ideas that underpin kind of the Peace Education Project, Peace Education Action for Impact. But here are a few other things. But looking round at the field, you know, and over the last 10, 20 years, there's some long-standing tensions, binaries within the field between those that do the thinking, those that do the action, between those that do the education, those that do the action, between other things such as peace project management, between doing projects to young people or doing projects with them. So this model, Peace Education Action for Impact, which I'm going to speak more about, tries to address this in some way. It links theory and practice. We love this idea of Anthony Bing, who talked about this idea of good peace studies, which really should enable students to engage in processes of thinking their way into new forms of action and acting their way into new forms of thinking. I love that. I think that's a really, really good way of thinking about what really good peace building should be about. And of course, that does not happen frequently across peace studies courses. It doesn't, and we know that's an issue. The linking of education and action is also another area which needs addressing. On one hand, research shows that universities are good in terms of providing theories and concepts which are necessary, but not sufficient, but they're not very good in terms of providing young people with what employers want and what young people want or students want, which is project management skills. So there's a gap between what universities are providing and what employers and participants want. The idea of youth agency as well, that often projects are done to young people, not done with them. And the idea of intergenerational collaboration. We now live in an interconnected, more than ever world. So of course we need to be working through these ideas of intergenerational and cross-cultural work. And some of the other ideas that inform the model is that we bring students together from different disciplines because they should be learning with and from each other. Most of it, formal education, is kind of set up in from 9 till 10, I'll be a psychologist. From 10 till 11, I'll be a sociologist. The world is not like that. We need to really look at issues of violence, which can never be addressed through one particular lens. My background psychotherapy, so I was trained in kind of the interpersonal relationships, etc. But my doctorate is in international conflict analysis, so I understand the policies. And I did that strategically to try and understand the different ways of looking at peace and violence. Another thing is that I think there's amazing work being done around the world in terms of peace building. There's less work being done. Quakers is one brilliant example. I'm a massive fan of them. Among others, Wilf is there's many others, Code Pink, among others. But there's less attention that looks at the problematic of war. And I think that's one of the areas that we really should be working with young people to educate them around. And some of the products that we kind of, or the impact of the work that we do is that we train young people, but we also support them to do peace projects as well. And we use digital technology to kind of facilitate these interactions. So there's a little bit like the model, but what does all this look like in practice? Well, we set out to try and test this as a model, and we did it last year. To test a model for facilitating intergenerational and cross-cultural peace learning and collaboration, with a particular focus on engaging young people as peace builders. And we tested it, we refined this model in 2021. I'll skip through that bit. Here's what it looks like visually. And I'm going to talk through this so it kind of makes sense. But the project was split up into two main parts. One was peace education and one was peace action. The peace action part had several kind of strands, such as supporting young people to research an issue, then take action to address that issue, then advocate for broader change, what we call the proliferation of peace, to try and engage more people more effectively. It actually engaged, I'll flip on this, it actually engaged 12 countries. It's the first for the peace building field, from what I know of, that took young people through a sustained project of peace education action. So 6 weeks of peace education online, and then 8 weeks of peace action, where it culminated in youth-led peace projects. Each country project team had 14 or more people. 10 were young people, aged 18 to 35, and then the 4 were adults. Of course, you know, it's blurry between who's adults and who's youth, but 2 were coordinators of the project and what happened in country. And they weren't all adults, actually, because the Russia-Ukraine team weren't all adults, but generally speaking. And then 2 were mentors who worked with young people through the process of peace education and then peace action. So we tried this in 2021, and here's the project. Here's the countries that were involved. 4 from Africa: Cameroon, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Kenya. 4 from Europe: a UK, Ukraine, and Russia joint team, which was very interesting. Serbia and Turkey, and then 4 from the Americas: US, Canada, Colombia, and Venezuela, with all these country project teams. Some of the impacts, I'm going to break this down shortly, but it trained young people in 12 different countries around the fundamentals of peace building. It also trained another 40 adult supporters to act more effectively, to work more effectively alongside and in a company with young people as they develop their projects. And I'm going to speak a little bit about that shortly. We invited about 20 other facilitators, many known in the peace building field. Tony Jenkins, who was the education director before me at World Beyond War, was one of the facilitators for the 6 weeks, among others. Some of my colleagues, Rotary Peace Fellows, were also invited. Mediators Beyond Borders and many other organizations kind of supported this work. Here's a photo, an image of the end of project celebration. And all young people from the 12 countries had their platform to present their work for peace and their projects. So you have, you know, Annie from Venezuela here, Maria from Colombia, Guy from Cameroon, Azu from Turkey, etc. You can see a whole kind of host of people. So what did they go through? What did they go through? Well, the 6 weeks of peace education is part 1. And this was broken down and into an online course, basically, where people would access the material and engage online, engage with issues related to challenging war and promoting peace. You've got some details there of how much engagement. So we asked about 3 to 6 hours per week. They had online content that they would read through, videos, materials, and then at the end of the week, they would respond to questions which were based on the material that they were learning. Broadly speaking, we tried to organize the program around what we call the knowing, being, and doing of peace building. There's often an over-focus within peace education on the cognitive and rational kind of focus, which is necessary but not sufficient, and less focus on the kind of the being side, the spiritual, the transrational kind of approaches, etc. So, but also there's obviously a gap in terms of the action part. So we broke the 6 weeks up into 2 weeks of the head, the knowing, 2 weeks of the heart, and 2 weeks of the hands. And I'm going to say something about that shortly, but here gives you a visual. So the 2 weeks of the head drew from our seminal book here on the right-hand side, which is called A Global Security System, an Alternative to War. And week 1 provided a kind of an introduction to peace building, looking at core concepts such as violence, conflict, peace, and power. And it also looked at the role of young people in this work. And week 2, or module 2, really looked at a systems approach, system thinking, and the role of the war system and also a peace system. So it looked at the downsides of the current system that we have, which is, of course, the war system, and the ideas and the practices of an evolving peace system. Week 3 and 4, we're looking at the heart of peace building that we say, the being part. So we had module 3 was ways of being with self, and it really asked participants to turn the mirror inwards and to look at ideas of inner peace, drawing from ideas of reflective practice, drawing on things from psychotherapy also, such as focusing, to really encourage them. And the research that we did, and it's still kind of ongoing, but we worked with other social researchers at the University of Cambridge and Columbia, shows that young people really got a lot from this particular module, really got a lot. And module 4, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog barking in the background there, but he's just run off to see who's knocking at the door. Module 4 was ways of being with others. So it looked at interpersonal relationships, and it drew from someone who's my hero of all time, somebody called Carl Rogers, who's the founder of a person-centered approach, but also dialogue and dialogue, interpersonal relationships, and active listening. So it kind of trained young people around these issues. And we actually did a dialogue, and we actually did active listening online during modules 3 and 4. And then modules 5 and 6 looked at, okay, well, how do we take some of this and put it into practice? So we had one module looking at how do we design and implement a peace project, looking at issues related to how do we design a needs analysis, what is a theory of change, how do we create a project plan? And then module 6 was looking at how do we monitor and evaluate this project. Here's a little bit of information about the online platform. And here's an example. After going through the material, people could read through and they were asked questions such as, reread the definition and common themes of peace building and come up with your own kind of definition of peace building. The work introduced young people to some of the World Beyond Wars work, but also some of the leading theories and ideas and practices drawn from the peace building, but also social change, sustainable development fields more broadly. But of course, education is necessary, but not sufficient. The real utility of any of our ideas only ever gets tested in practice. That's, of course, the final kind of test of our ideas. So what happened was that the young people took what they learned and took up the difficult challenge of translating knowledge and learning into action and impact via youth-led peace projects. So they did this by working in their country project teams, and the mentors would work with young people, and we use this language, youth lead, adults guide. It's a real collaboration, but they play different roles. The young people take the lead here, not the adults. But the adults play a really, 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 really important role. They're there to guide young people. So through the next 8 weeks, they actually did projects. And what we wanted to do was to build this kind of idea of a community of practice, a community of inquiry. So every couple of weeks, we'd jump on a Zoom call and South Sudan would share how they're doing with Venezuela, and Venezuela would share how they're doing with Cameroon, as a way of really building this idea of this facilitating South-South and South-North kind of conversations. So it was brilliant because many of the young people said, wow, we've never had a chance to kind of, engage with someone from South Sudan who's there on the ground doing this work, And we really believe that, let's say, less peaceful countries should be in contact with more peaceful countries, so they can really learn from each other. Here's an example of one of the country project teams. This is Venezuela, as you can see, made up of young people and not so young people who work together. And here's some examples, which we don't have time because I want to finish and move on, but some examples of what were some of the projects that they did. Well, the projects, they had a general framework to work towards, which is laid out in our book, which lays out a blueprint, suggests one blueprint of many for working towards the end of the abolition of war and the establishment of a just and sustainable peace, which revolves around three broad strategies. One, demilitarizing security, which is broadly linked to the idea of negative peace, broadly. Two, managing conflict without violence. So within that, we have issues related to local infrastructures for peace, reforming the UN, etc. And then three is the more kind of future-orientated ideas or processes, a culture of peace. So within that, we have strategies such as peace education, peace journalism, telling a different story, the role of young people. And that's more kind of aligned with positive peace. So here's some examples of some of the projects that were done. There were great projects. Like, for example, the US did a great project and they put an album together fusing arts and science where they draw from what they learned on the course and then put an album together called Peace Accords. So they had one song that looked at inner peace, one song that looked at negative peace, one song that looked at the war system. Another great example of a project was Nigeria, who addressed the issue of kidnapping by bringing young people, police officers, community members together to research this issue and then try and address it. Kenya was another good project. South Sudan couldn't physically do their project because it was dangerous in South Sudan. So they actually trained 100 refugees living in Kenya who were from South Sudan around issues related to peace leadership and things like this. Another good project was Cameroon. Cameroon was another great project which addressed the issue of youth exclusion. And what they did, they actually got a letter from one of the ministers from the country to congratulate them on the great work that they'd done. And they're building on this moving forward. So that was what happened in 2021. It was always an idea to have this as a model moving forward. So now we're working with our partner in this collaborative is Rotary, in particular Rotary Action Group for Peace. And we worked in collaboration to design the project. Parts of the funding come in particularly from Rotary and Rotarians. So if there's any on the phone, thank you so much. In fact, I know there is some on the phone. So thank you so much to those that are on the phone and for supporting the work. The idea now is that we build on this. And we're currently planning's underway to have another, we don't know how many teams yet, but we're in conversations with or have funding from Iraq, India, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Haiti, Bosnia, Ghana, Egypt. We're still in conversations with Great Britain and also South Africa. If those are on the call, they're interested, want to be part of this team, then please, write to us. I'll put my email in the chat. Each country project team is made up of, as you know, 10 young people and then 4 coordinators. Usually the coordinators help find the funding and provide the scholarships for young people to go through the program. Yeah, I think this is in terms of next steps, we're now in the recruitment process. We aim to start the project in January. We aim to have the country project teams in place by November and the funding in place by December. We've been planning this for about 10 months already, so it's not just a case of, doing it now. What we are doing differently in this model, in the 2023 model, is that we'll be bringing back some of the young people that went through the project in 2021 and training them as mentors and to support other young people going through the project. There we go. Thank you so much for practicing your active listening, everyone. And thank you so much for listening to me. Hopefully you've got a bit of an idea of what peace education aims to do, why it was created and how it works. Please feel free to write to us. We'd love to hear from you. And the big thing here today is that we hope that our time together leads to more time together in the future. So thank you so much for everything that you do. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Phil, for presentation of this incredible course. Indeed, very I even can't find a word to express how it is full of information, how it is well designed. And by the way, Phil mentioned a book, A Global Security System, An Alternative to War. It also exists in edition of audiobook, so you can find it at the website worldbeyondwar.org. And also I could recommend another great book. It is Waging Peace by David Hartzug. It is memoirs, a book with life experience of one of creators of Nonviolent Peace Force, organization aimed at global nonviolent action to achieve peace and alleviate pains of war. And then, of course, I mentioned these books. You know, it is a rare book, but I like it very much. It is Glassel's Confronting Conflict. One of leaders of our network, Eastern European Network for Citizenship Education, Yurii Sheliazhenko, must leave shortly, and he asks opportunity to pose question earlier than others, because we have one another presenter. I ask to excuse for this intervention, but we need to do this. So Yurii asked his question in chat. He wrote, Yurii, do you like to pose your question yourself, or I will translate from chat? I will translate the question from chat. Yurii Sheliazhenko wrote, I think that nobody have doubts about usefulness and importance of peace education. With the time, it must give results and decrease number of conflicts and wars. But today, unfortunately, in the world, there are a lot of criminals who want war to satisfy their ambitions. And there is unprecedented military aggression of Russia, which violates all possible international norms. Yurii asks me, because I know contacts and I am from Ukraine. He asks me what is my attitude to Ukrainian warriors, which yesterday were peaceful citizens and today took arms to protect the right to peaceful life and the right to life itself. It is heroes or people who didn't receive peace education. And also, Yurii asked that a variant of peaceful resistance, unfortunately, in situation of Russian aggression, is finishing for Ukrainian cities and villages after hundreds and thousands of rapes and killings of peaceful Ukrainian population. So I must answer to this question to Yurii. I will answer in English and then I will answer in Russian. It would be very short. Of course, it is hard questions. But there are some simple answers to it. Question about attitude to warriors. In international law, there is a right to self-defense. So in aggressive war, all people, of course, have a right to self-defense, and traditional way of self-defense is the way of warriors. But as Yurii quoted me, indeed, I am convinced that this way of warrior is based on lack of knowledge. Because when you have a knowledge about nonviolent resistance to aggression, when you have knowledge about collateral damage of responding with violence to violence and about vicious circle of violence, you probably would at least try to dedicate your efforts for nonviolent resistance to aggression. By the way, recently a report on nonviolent resistance to Russian aggression in Ukraine was issued. It describes 235 cases of nonviolent resistance. So it is possible. And I hope that in future there will be no wars and there will be no need of turning peaceful citizens into warriors because of growing knowledge about peaceful life. It is my answer to the first question. And also it is an answer to the second question, because this report, which I mentioned, indeed shows that peaceful resistance is always possible. Now, shortly in Russian. Я оглашу вопрос Юрия Петрушенко, который он написал в чате. Юрий, вы не хотите сами озвучить этот вопрос? Юрий один из лидеров нашей сети, он должен уходить немножко раньше, поэтому я...
Юрий, ну в целом я на английском, добрый вечер, коллеги, услышал как бы ответ, ну то есть если может кому-то нужно еще перевести, я на английском в общем-то понимаю, я не так хорошо говорю, но понимаю. Я просто вот хочу сказать, надеюсь вы меня переведете, с комментарием скорее к международным коллегам. Мне кажется, что нельзя говорить сейчас о мире как о нечто гипотетическом. Мы имеем дело с конкретными войнами, и нельзя ставить равенство между убийцей и жертвой, между насильником и изнасилованной. И часто, когда мы говорим, что нужен мир для всех, мне кажется, что это не совсем так. То есть вот выше был комментарий, где было сказано, что если мы не ставим на место хулигана, таким образом мы, в общем-то, способствуем развитию того, что хулиганов станет больше. Добро сегодня, пока, по крайней мере, мы не внедрим мирное образование, должно быть с кулаками. Оно должно ставить на место и хулиганов, и таких, как Путин. И об этом тоже нужно говорить. Об этом тоже нужно говорить. Иначе я скажу, что вот как это выглядит, вот то, о чем вы сейчас говорите, это выглядит как оправдание определенное, к сожалению. Оправдание того, что, ну, война в Украине, потому что вот не мирная, не было. То есть ставится знак равенства. Ну, я не буду уже дальше говорить, я думаю, что Юра переведет. Спасибо.
Окей, спасибо, Юрий. Я просто вначале отвечу на ремарку, а потом все-таки оглашу ваш вопрос и коротко о своем ответе. Значит, это самое. Естественно, я не ставлю знак равенства, и никто не будет ставить знак равенства между преступником и жертвой. Но одно дело совершение военных преступлений, убийства, изнасилования, приказ начать войну войскам, который отдал Путин, и тому подобное преступное решение. И совсем другое дело, когда, например, некоторые заявляют, что каждый гражданин России военный преступник. Ведь есть люди, которые так утверждают. Почему они так говорят? Из конфликтологии хорошо известно, что во время конфликта возникает ложный образ врага. Тогда, когда мы судим не только неправильное поведение, но мы преувеличиваем преступность поведения, мы делаем из людей с их грехами, и не только грехами, с их способностью исправляться и каяться, с их способностью быть привлеченными и наказанными быть за, значит, мы делаем из людей чертей с рогами. Конечно, иногда они могут вести себя как черти, но это не значит, что, во-первых, все, кто встретился на их пути, тоже черти, и, во-вторых, это не значит, что они никак не могут быть привлечены к ответственности и не могут быть исправлены. Да, то есть вот именно поэтому надо понимать, что да, есть разница между преступником и жертвой, но также есть разница между объективным осуждением преступления и приписыванием преступности невинным людям по некой ассоциации с преступником и нанесение ущерба невинным людям в процессе мести преступнику. Потому что справедливость – это не месть. Да? Вот это вот по поводу этого так называемого уравнивания. Да, когда мы стремимся к правде, мы не уравниваем преступника и жертву. Мы просто показываем, где тут объективная справедливость, а где тут объективная несправедливость. Мы подчеркиваем, что люди не бывают демонами. Люди – это люди. Иногда ведут себя плохо, иногда ведут себя хорошо. За хорошее поведение надо вознаграждать, плохое поведение надо предотвращать и наказывать. И делать это не так, чтобы уничтожить, а так, чтобы изменить мир к лучшему. Вот это коротко по поводу вашей последней реплики, Юрий. Теперь, значит, Юрий написал в чате. Я думаю, что ни у кого не вызывает сомнения полезности, важности образования для мира. Со временем это должно дать результаты и уменьшить количество конфликтов и войн. Но сегодня, к сожалению, в мире есть много преступников, которые хотят войны для удовлетворения своих амбиций. Есть беспрецедентная военная агрессия России, нарушающая все возможные международные нормы. Вопрос ко мне. Поскольку я знаю контекст, я из Украины. Как я отношусь к украинским воинам, которые вчера были мирными жителями, а сегодня взяли в руки оружие, чтобы защитить право на мирную жизнь, а точнее право на жизнь? Это герои или люди, которые не получили мирное образование? Вариант мирного сопротивления, пишет Юрий Петрушенко, к сожалению, в ситуации с российской агрессией заканчивается для украинских сел и городов сотнями и тысячами изнасилований и убийств мирного украинского населения. И мой ответ, который я дал на английском, это сложный вопрос, конечно, но в первом приближении ответ на этот вопрос простой. Есть международно признанное право на самозащиту. И, конечно, нельзя терпеть преступления. Если выбор, который человек видит перед собой, видимо, от недостатка знаний, как правильно меня процитировал Юрий, это ничего не делать или сопротивляться силой, то, как в свое время отметил Махатма Ганди, ну, в такой ситуации, наверное, надо сопротивляться силой. Но мы должны иметь достаточно знаний для того, чтобы, если это на практике возможно, избирать другой путь, сопротивляться насилию без насилия. И вот я хочу продемонстрировать вам очень интересный документ. Это доклад Одну секундочку. Кстати говоря, я дал даже линк на этот доклад в чате. И вот вы видите у меня на экране страницу этого самого доклада, подготовленного на ВАКТ. Ukrainian nonviolent civil resistance in the face of war. Украинское ненасильственное сопротивление перед лицом войны. Этот доклад доступен на украинском, на английском, на испанском и даже на каталонском. И из этого доклада можно узнать об описанных исследователями 235 случаев ненасильственного сопротивления российской агрессии. Если бы мы были лучше подготовлены именно к ненасильственному сопротивлению, этих случаев могло бы быть больше. И более того, если бы мы сейчас это лучше изучали, мы могли быть более активными в этом. Рекомендую ознакомиться с этим докладом. При этом я подчеркиваю, разумеется, никто не будет спорить с нормой устава ООН о том, что каждая нация имеет право на самозащиту. Но в то же время тем же уставом ООН предусмотрена необходимость мирного решения споров. Вот тот, кто это совместит, тот человек знающий, и то общество достаточно зрелое. Now, I will just translate the last remark of Yurii Sheliazhenko, answering to my reply to his question. He said that we should not equate aggressor and victim, and I said indeed we should not. But we should not also make from people with their behavior, even criminal behavior, some sort of demons, and associate with perpetrators of crimes a lot of other people who are not guilty in crimes and seek revenge, not justice, harming innocent people in this course of revenge. Because of that, we need a critical attitude to war, which is not equating aggressor and victim. It is objective vision of escalation of conflict. And there is no conflict in which all sides are behaving good, especially in war. Any war is organized mass killing. And you cannot organize mass killing without killing innocents. So when in result of ignorance, in result of lack of diplomatic skills, skills of nonviolent resistance and so on, number of innocent victims is growing and growing. It is not guilt only of one side. There is always a part of, unfortunately, not the best behavior on both sides. With all understanding that one side is the gross violator and other side probably is lesser violator. Now, sorry for this intervention. Yurii insisted on it, and he is one of leaders of our network. And we have the last speaker. I have honor to invite Werner Wintersteiner. He have PhD in education with focus in peace education from University of Klagenfurt in Austria. And he is member of the editorial board of the Journal of Peace Education. Werner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yurii. I think this was now a very important discussion between the two Yuris, and it's really at the heart of all discussions we have in my country about Ukraine. And I believe that it shows one thing that leads us directly also to the problem of education, this is dealing with complexity, because any war is missing out any complexity, and education, and peace education especially, has to teach and to train people also to understand and to accept complexity. My background, as you said, is as a former professor of Klagenfurt University and founder of a Center for Peace Research and Peace Education. And so I have theoretical and practical experiences. And today I will speak about education for a culture of peace, first from a more theoretical point of view, and at the end to come to some practical examples, because I believe it is not enough to understand peace education as a kind of technique that you can learn and teach, or simply as a personal attitude, but you have to see it as a way of living in some way, as a part of a cultural transformation of the whole society. So I will now share my, here. I hope you can see my slides. Can you? Yeah? Okay. I start with a quotation from Gandhi, which is a very simple phrase. And in my opinion, it's one of the most revolutionary statements you can do. It is possible to live in peace. This means humankind is not condemned to a state of eternal war. We can overcome the age of wars. We can overcome a situation where people fight against each other. And this is only possible via cultural and structural transformation of our societies, of the whole planet. This means also there is no justification for war. And this is also the basis for any education. It is in line with the so-called Sevilla statement of 1986, where a couple of very renowned psychologists, anthropologists, cultural scientists wrote this statement in the name of UNESCO. And they said it is scientifically proved that people is not condemned to aggressions that leads to war. This is a decision of policymakers. This is a decision of people, and we can change this, and we have to work for this. This means peace education and any education for similar objectives is not simply something for little children to do for a better moral attitude, but it is a part of a very important, of the real thing, let's say, of the necessary transformation of our whole society and of all societies in our world communities. So we are in a very interesting adventure, I guess, in this moment. It's a moment where humankind can decide to perish or to survive and to get to a higher status of humankind than ever been before. Another simple phrase: nothing prepares the persistence of peace except the habit of not consenting to war. The habit of not consenting to war, which means this has to be trained, this has to be incorporated, this has to become a culture, this has to become an attitude, and not a one moment decision and another decision in the next moment. Maybe you do not know Léon Werth. Léon Werth is maybe you know the story of the Little Prince. And this book is dedicated to Léon Werth, a friend of the author of The Little Prince and a very important French pacifist. Okay, I continue with the fact that we are living in any culture, in any state, in a culture of war. And of course, this means also structures of war. And only if we overcome this culture of war, we can reach these profound social transformations that we need, and that in this moment people is discussing with climate crisis and with abolition of species and things like this. But you have to see the whole picture. You have not only overcoming war against nature, you have also overcoming patriarchy, you have overcoming militarism, overcoming nationalism, colonialism, and capitalism. And my thesis is this is all linked together. And you cannot, for instance, really face militarism in a society where the values of patriarchy are anchored. Or you cannot overcome nationalism and come to global citizenship standpoint if you don't also attack all other aspects of this culture of war. And education for a culture of peace is thus a very important part of this necessary transformation, this social change, which should happen and which is happening in some way in different societies, in one more than in another. But we have to accept that in any society there exists a culture of war. And there is an interesting story when the United Nations were proclaiming the year of the culture of peace and the decade. They had also a resolution mentioning that it's necessary to overcome the culture of war. But this didn't enter in the final resolution because European states protested and vetoed it, and they said, no, we have no culture of war. You cannot put this in the resolution. So you see, a part of the culture of war is also to deny that we are in the state of a culture of war. What means then culture of peace? I believe it is a very, very important concept, and I prefer the notion education for culture of peace to the notion of peace education, because it shows it is a missing link between personal attitudes and political behavior and political events and political structures even. Culture of peace is personal and political in the same moment. And this is why education for culture of peace and human rights is such a central part, not only for a special kind of education, but it should be, in my opinion, at the heart of any education, because if education is to help surviving the humankind, then we have to face the real problems of our time. And the real problems are the problem of survival of humankind and of a better status and a more equilibrated situation of human living together. This is not very new for you, maybe gender sensitivity, peace logic instead of a security logic, nonviolent conflict transformation, global citizenship education, and what I would like to call planetary citizenship. This is what I like much better than education for sustainable development, because the idea of development and the idea of sustainability are not very good together. So I prefer this term, planetary citizenship. This is more or less, if you want, the conceptual framework of an updated education of a culture of peace and human rights. Of course, there are many other fields also, but this is a very short overview only. Okay. one more thing that I have to say, because this was, it was a little bit mentioned in Phil's very interesting presentation, but I think it should be highlighted that any education is much more than education of cognitive aspects and dimension. It is psychological and psychosocial. And we see that in our society, we have a status of pessimism and no self-confidence, and very often of fear, which turns out to become aggression against others, because we have at the core this idea of individualism and egoism. I really would like to call it an ideology, a religion of individualism and egoism. And you see it also in the COVID crisis, no trust in science, a belief in very simple truths, and conspiracy myths. Sometimes it's called conspiracy theories, but there are no theories, there are myths. And education for a culture of peace means not simply to a propaganda for peace, but it is to strengthen the personality of the learners and to help them to develop their personalities. This means to help them to get self-esteem, to get optimism, and from optimism comes out courage and hopefully also solidarity. It comes out also a preparedness to tackle conflicts if they are necessary, but in a non-violent way, and a trust in research, which means at the same time a trust in doubt, because research means always that you have some theories, but they can be wrong, and you have always to know that you cannot, maybe you're not right, and if you don't accept the doubt, you don't accept the complexity of the reality. So I think this is also very important, but children and also elder people should learn. And in some way, I think these are values of a culture of peace. And the real art of education, in my opinion, is that the linking of psychological, psychosocial, and cognitive aspects in the process of education, not to teach them as separate entities, but to link them always. And I write also psychosocial, because education is not about the education of the individual, it's always about the education of the individual within a given society, within a given group, within a given social connection. Yeah, for this I have now identified 5 different examples, but they are not simply examples. They are based on my experience. They are more than random examples. There are 5 types of peace education. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but there are some different ways, and there's always a story behind. I know it is very late, so my stories will be very short, simply some words for every story, but that you can have an idea of a picture of the whole thing. The first is an example of the peace school in Croatia during the war in what we call now ex-Yugoslavia, during the war in Yugoslavia. And the interesting thing is that in this region of Croatia, with a mixed population, Serbs and Croats, it was possible to establish peace without starting any war, because of the heroism of some people that for me are the best peace heroes I ever knew in my life. And in order to stabilize this peace, they founded this peace school, which means a kind of weekend school and summer courses for students in the region, both Serbs and Croats, to work together. So I think this is so important to have this example that they could come together during the war as an island of peace, if you want. And this was then even more extended immediately after finishing this war in 1995. So this is an example for peace education in the midst of the conflict. The second one is studying a past conflict, which is now not anymore the conflict, but which is a conflict of memory. And this is not a study of one country, of some students about their own history, but it's a common study of students from different countries, neighborhood country in what we call Alps-Adriatic region. This means Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, and Austria, about our common history in World War I, in World War II. This, we have a common history, but it's at the same time a dividing history because we have very different narratives. And so the most important thing in this example is the dialogue and the confrontation, peaceful confrontation of different memory cultures, of different narratives. So learning, it's a kind of conflict resolution learning, but with the narratives that prevail in their respective societies. So I could talk about this longer, but I will pass to the next one. The next example is in the framework of a master program of Klagenfurt University, which is called Global Citizenship Education. And we have embedded the problem of war and peace into this wider picture and made also, besides many lectures and many other tasks, a study trip to Bosnia this year. And the example here is the task that we gave them. We said they should make a picture, a photograph of anything that is linked for them to war and peace, and write a comment. And all other students comment on these comments. So this was a very lively discussion after the study trip. And this is a way that, as also Phill said, it is so important that the students are not the object of teaching, but the subject of their own learning process. And methodologies like this one help students to learn, because seeing something is not a learning experience. Only the reflection on what you have seen is a learning experience, and the exchange with others, with your peers that have lived the same experience but have seen it in a different way. So another example. I come now to Guernica Gogoratus. This is in Guernica, Basque Country, Spain, where I have also worked with students from all over Europe. This is so interesting because it allows a study of past and present wars. Guernica is, of course, known about this history of World War II, and before World War II, the bombing of the city by Nazi aircrafts. But it's also about the conflict with Basque underground organizations. And the interesting is that in this museum, they are linking the past war, the ongoing conflict, at least the moment when the museum was founded, it was an ongoing conflict, and to bring this together, past and present wars. So it's not only about a peace museum, but it's about the confronting of two different realities in one region that you can study, and that people they are concerned about and they are living there, and of course other people as well, they can study and learn this. Yeah. As a final example, I would mention an Austrian campaign, a global campaign for what we call Homeland Earth, according to French philosopher Edgar Morin, who has written the book Homeland Earth, a vision of renewed humankind that overcomes war and overcomes the war against nature. And this campaign with a manifesto, with different activities, with 1 week study week and so on, is a kind of global campaign for global citizenship. And it's a truly peace education initiative. And we had partners all over the world, and the partners developed different activities by themselves. And by the way, during this campaign, I was also virtually a year ago in Ukraine to present this also in Ukraine. And this was also part of some Ukrainian university teaching and so on. So these are 5 different types, if you want, of peace education. There are many, many more, of course, but maybe you have an idea what I mean to link activities of students and teaching, to link the cognitive aspect and the more emotional side and so on. Yeah, it's very late, and I will finish with another quotation. Civilization is in a race between education and catastrophe. Let us learn the truth and spread it as far and wide as our circumstances allow. For the truth is the greatest weapon we have. You see, this is not very new, this quotation. This comes from British writer H.G. Wells. But the truth is that because we are still in this culture war and still in this part of history of humankind with so many problems and with such a hard resistance against any progress towards peace. So this quotation is still very timely. Spasiba, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Werner. It is indeed very deep food for thought in this quotation of H.G. Wells, and your presentation was very interesting. You know, I recalled another quote of Wells in the outline of history. He wrote that understanding of history as a common adventure of all humankind is important to achieve peace within and between societies. It is for your idea of education for peace culture and planetary citizenship. Now we have 25 minutes for questions and discussion, and I already see that one of leaders of Eastern European Network for Citizenship Education, Natalie Gamselidze, wrote some questions and comments in chat. Natalie, would you like to pose your questions and maybe to read or say in your words this comments and questions which you put into chat? Okay, Natalie wrote in chat, that she thinks, what if every Ukrainian citizen right now thinks about that we do nothing and let us extinct? Who's next in this list of empires? She believes a cause of greater good, but when war is at my door, sorry, I can't extinct because I am young, full of life, and I still want to see a sunrise just down to the earth. I am a person who is actually personally affected by war, and obviously one who condemns war and violence. And I see that Natalie asked, so what happens when war is documented? Where does the justice stand in peace education? Do we teach kids who is enemy? How are we shaping future citizens? Are we letting them forget the past? Who like to take this question? Because Natalie didn't specify it for what speaker these questions are addressed. I see Werner likes to ask, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Natalie, for this, I think, very hard question. I would like to give you my personal answers only, because, of course, very similar arguments are always coming in Austria when I'm speaking about the war. My answer, of course, as a foreigner is in some ways a little easier. Say, it is not my right to decide about how Ukrainian people decides to fight back. I said, of course, there is a right to self-defense, and I believe that self-defense is very legitimate. I simply say that self-defense in a military way has many also negative consequences, and it is my duty as a peace researcher to talk about this and to say, and this is you can say non-violent resistance doesn't stop the war, but I see that violent resistance doesn't stop the war either. And I see a personal dilemma also. I will not deny it. I mean, I'm in some way I'm happy if Ukrainian soldiers succeed in some ways of defending the country. Yeah, of course. And then on the other hand, I said to myself and I said to others, would be better to try it in a only non-violent way. So it's a real dilemma, and I, as a foreigner, I do not have any right to say to somebody, you should or you should not, or so. This is not the question. My mission is in some way also, and this is maybe the last thing that I want to say, and this is also important. My mission is also to observe the ongoing question of a culture of war in my country also, and the changing of any pacifist ideals into some militaristic ideals, and say, this is very dangerous. I can warn for this. This is more or less my mission. And I'm sure, Natalie, said you will not be very satisfied with my answer, but it's the truth.
I see Phill also like to take this question, but thank you, Werner, for your answer. And very, very shortly from myself. Of course, we should not teach kids who is enemy. By the way, it is literally what some people are teaching. I heard it at one webinar, by the way, one of rare webinars about peace, organized by one of partners of Eastern European Network for Citizen Education. And one of presenters said, we are teaching kids that Russia is enemy. Well, maybe we should teach that not who is enemy, but where is injustice. And maybe we should teach that there is a way to deal with injustice non-violently, and to analyze, to show a lot of examples. As I said, there is an academic report with 235 accounts of non-violent resistance to Russian aggression. So we can resist injustice without violence. Please, Phill, you'd like to take this question.
Thank you, Yurii. Yeah, and it's a great question, and I follow Werner and Yurii in terms of, I'm a foreigner from outside, I have no idea, but it's often a question that again asks, well, what would you do then, Phill? And my answer is, I don't know. I can never know. You know, I'm not living in the shoes of other people. I don't know. What I try and suggest is that we can try and look at examples of things that have worked in the past, you know, go to what the data suggests works in terms of, you know, non-violence is a philosophy, but it's practically, it works. There's so much science, you know, behind it that works. Another thing, dialogue works as well. I don't think all alternatives have been exhausted yet, and even if in the last resort, which at World Beyond War we don't believe there is ever is a need ever to go to war, even if the last resort is that, then we should exhaust all other alternatives before we go there. But we haven't done that yet. We haven't tried the dialogue route. We haven't, you know, there's wonderful kind of non-violence taking place on both sides. And I think we probably need to highlight a little bit more of the great, Yuri's doing some great work on this, and the partners around the great work that's happening on the ground in terms of, you know, non-violence. So those would be, and I was going to say what you said, Yurii, around the enemy part. I think if you look at, you know, peace and conflict and war studies and work related broadly to that, it's this idea of kind of dehumanizing each other, you know, and when we dehumanize other people and don't see them as human beings, it tries to legitimate some of the awful things which people do. So I think it's important to see the humanity in each of us. So there's a part answer. It's not a full answer.
Thank you, Phill. I see that Fernando raised hand, and also I see a question from Gordon in the chat. Since Gordon asked question previously, I'd like to give a floor to Gordon to pose a question, and then to Fernando.
Before I pose the question, I'd like just to say that something is particularly important is the distinction between human security and the security of territory, land. And I think I would be much more concerned about wanting to save people's lives, and suggesting that the first thing anyone does is to find a place of safety for themselves, and I think to worry less about protecting territory. If the enemy, and I think I can understand that Ukrainians would regard Russians as enemies, if the enemy overrun your town or area, district, you will then nevertheless still see another sunrise and live to perhaps to work for peace in spite of that. Anyway, that's just a thought. My question was in particular to both Phill and Werner, that I saw in the charts that that Werner showed. On the one hand, individualism and egoism as part of sort of culture of neoliberalism and patriarchy and warfare and so on. And on the other side, I noticed self-esteem as part of a culture of peace. And it occurred to me to wonder whether leaders such as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, very egotistical, so far as I can tell, whether they, in actual fact, may not be at all obvious, but I do wonder whether they actually lack self-esteem. I wonder what Phill and Werner might think about that.
Werner, do you go ahead, and I'm going to think about that. That's a good question.
Okay, so I start without thinking. Sorry, I don't know, and I'm not sure if this is the right question. I mean, it is quite possible that they are this is a kind of super compensation of their lack of self-esteem in some way. But this would be about only the psychology of two leaders. And my concern is more about the ordinary people and the mass. And I think there is very often, and I observe this now with my people in my country, with the COVID crisis. I observe it with their dealing with refugees. I see it in face of the Ukrainian crisis, where, of course, also due to the mass media, at the beginning it was more to support Ukrainian people. Now it's more the fear of lack of gas, oil, and too high prices and so on. So a very egoistic way in some way, and led by fear also. And it is not so that directly now people are so much touched by this. So this is, I believe it is not only the natural reaction to some facts, but it's a reaction to some facts according to their personality. And I believe a stronger personality with more optimism and more courage in daily life also can deal in a much better way with any crisis. And this is the point that I wanted to say. Let me at the last point bring a quote from a Congolese radio maker about Europeans in the situation of COVID 2 years ago. He said, oh, they are really poor, these Europeans, with their COVID crisis, because they are not used to living crisis. We have every day all kind of crisis, but in a quite ironical way, he said, oh, they are not used for them. This is the first crisis in their life. They have no experience with this. So this was my point. I hope it was clear enough.
Thank you, Gordon. And in order to answer your question, I'll actually say something about the first thing you said around kind of the territory versus human security, which I think is a really interesting comment. So here's me, I say this as, you know, someone from the UK who tends to, let's say people there's a tendency, you know, within the UK to think of, or to speak as I, you know, and think in individual terms in similar ways perhaps to Europe. But someone also that's lived extensively in South America, in particular Bolivia for many years, who don't think so much in terms of I and think more in terms of we. and in particular in Bolivia, they speak a lot about the Mother Earth and the importance of, you know, protecting violence against nature, which they don't see as separate. So I think that you've got me thinking that yeah, that kind of primacy of human security over territory might be questioned here in Bolivia. It's just one thought I have. And then linked to that, of course, you know, the part of the challenges, and in our book, A Global Security System, we talk about no one is safe until all of us are safe, and put a real emphasis on this idea of human security, common security versus state security. So there's part of the answer on that one. And then with regards to the point about Trump and Putin and others, I can't comment on their, you know, even with my psychotherapy hat on, I cannot comment in terms of their psychology. But I think part of the challenge as a peace builder is probably the challenge, if you take a sociological perspective in terms of looking at individual agency versus structure. And I think it's always that creative tension between the two, because individuals do have responsibility and agency and things like this, but they're always, and this in Werner's kind of presentation looked at that, I don't think used the word system, but we're always kind of embedded within a broader kind of system and intersecting things, lots of intersecting things going on. So I think that would be, you know, part of my answer in terms of the question that you raised as well. Gordon and I, make sure I just wrote some notes here. Yes, that's what I wanted to kind of come back on that.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Indeed, a lot of thoughts to consider in context of this question. I hope that we answered very comprehensively to Natalie. Now, I see a lot of questions in chat, and we have limited time. So I propose who likes to ask a question using mic, please raise a hand and do it as shortly as possible, and we will try to answer as shortly as possible.
Yeah, if I may, I would like to make a comment in reference to what Gordon said earlier about, as a former military myself, many years, we have a motto in South America. I'm originally from Chile, where we say we prepare for war to preserve peace, not to declare war. So it is important that the military people usually is there to protect their own people. That's the job of the military forces, to protect their country, their borders, but not to go out and impose their will of an authoritarian president, or like Putin has done, and somebody mentioned about the psychology or the lack of self-esteem, like Kim Jong-un or Putin or Trump. If you take the power away from them, what do they have? Nothing. So that's basically what it is. The lack of self-esteem, when they gain power, is all they want, to impose themselves on others. It is important that to continue promoting peace at the local level before these type of personalities get to the power. So it is important what we're doing right now, to learn, to train ourselves, educate, so that we can pass that information at the local level, a city level, county level, or whatever is the way that the countries or states are politically regionalized. So that's the comment that I just wanted to make and share with you. 1978, Chile and Argentina, we were very close to war, and the Pope came as an arbitrator and prevent the war between Chile and Argentina, and we were really at the door of the war. So it is important to have sometimes religion play a very important role, like the Pope did in 1978. So just something that I want to share with you.
Thank you, Fernanda. And indeed, the Declaration on a Culture of Peace emphasizes in particular role of religion along with educators, along with civil society organizations, along of course with governments in development of culture of peace. I see in the chat a question of Francis Lawrence. The media do not feature anybody advocating a peaceful settlement. In fact, they push for war. What can be done to correct that? In the question, in particular, some countries, United States and UK, are mentioned. But I think it is a question for media in warmongering countries too, like Russia or Ukraine, for example. What can we do? Who like to take this answer question? Phill, Werner?
Happy to say something about it. What can be done? I'm just looking again at where this is written. Yurii, whereabouts? Whereabouts is it in the chat so I can respond precisely?
It is in the chat. If you just roll it up, Francis Lawrence, 10:51 p.m. Questions: the US and UK media do not feature anybody advocating a peaceful settlement. In fact, they push for war. What can be done to correct that?
Yeah, okay. So I think one of the things that might come through here is the importance of looking at this system of things. So of course the media has a role to play. Of course indigenous communities has a role to play. Of course religion has a role to play. But what we have to do is not just look at these in isolation. We have to look at them as part of a broader kind of system which embeds all everything going on. The media in particular has a role to play. But it's also, there's something called cognitive bias, which is drawn from psychology, that we have a role to play as well, okay? Because if you turn on the television, oh, let's go to Bolivia, La Paz right now, where it's peaceful, okay? People won't probably turn to that, right? What they'll turn to is, okay, let's see what's happening in this country where there's lots of conflict, okay? So we have a role to play as human beings in terms of what we want to see on the TV, but also the media have a role to play as well. And Johan Galton and others, and it's in our book, is how can we move away from kind of journalism, which is promoting violence, promoting war, etc., towards more ideas of peace journalism, which is about telling different stories and showcasing all the great work that's done to work for non-violence and positive peace. Which there's less work of that, you know, so I think we have a role to play. And of course, a bigger thing that's come out in this is also the economy is something to think about as well in terms of money, right? Because 2 trillion a year is spent on preparing for war, a tiny is spent on preparing for peace. So what we need to think about is how can we divert money away from the war machine to more productive activities such as health, education, COVID mitigation. Because when people think about, I just think of you when I'm in England, right? And I remember when I was in the US, because I've lived in the US as well and taught many people in the US. I remember many times I was in the US and many of the students come to me and I've been speaking about war and things like this. And they'd say, but Phill, we don't really talk about war here because we're not involved with war, right? And that was, okay, we've got some discussions to have here. They might not be having the bombs dropped, you know, in their country, but they're definitely involved in war, you know, in terms of the country. So I think there's some kind of education to be had here as well. So there's a part answer.
Thank you, Phill. And very shortly, I would like to answer to this question. Well, if media are talking people in such simple, simplistic terms, we need to educate people, to prepare them to be more qualified audience. When people understand you can't apologize war and talk about myths of inevitability of war and so on in the media are changing their attitude. all starts from knowledge, or all starts from education. So our mission is educate. It is my answer to this question. Werner, you like also to say something on the media and what can we do with warmongering in media?
No, since it's very late, I would like to comment another question from Elma. And I guess, Elma, you have presented the dilemma of any military resistance in a very good way. You said you can understand the point of view of Natalia. When you're attacked, you need to respond to fight back because anything else could look like suicide or crazy standing and so on. But on the other hand, once the violence stops, you on the other side will feel sorry for participating in it. Yeah, and I think this is, we are in this dilemma. And what we can do from outside, of course, is a lesson too late for now. But we can study this war and say, was it unavoidable to have this war? And we say, no, there are some reasons why this came to this war. We have to learn the lesson and to avoid any next war, if ever possible. Secondly, even after the war in 2014, there was a huge movement, as far as I know, in Ukraine to train nonviolent resistance. And I think it's also a political thing that nonviolent resistance wasn't chosen as a national strategy like it was done in some way in Czechoslovakia in '68. Even if in Czechoslovakia this was not really trained before, and it was, of course, no time for any other resistance, but there is a resistance. And I really want to make it clear that not fighting in a militaristic way doesn't mean not resisting. This is not the same. And in many questions that I found in the chat, this is confused. And this is also confused in the media always. For instance, there was a wonderful proposal for peace negotiations. The only realistic one, in my opinion, was coming from Oscar Arias, from a Nobel Peace Prize recipient from Costa Rica. And he said, it needs a dramatic gesture in this situation. And what can it be? If NATO says, okay, we withdraw all nuclear weapons from Europe under the condition that Russia stops the aggression, of course. And we announce it only, but only if there is then a real peace treaty, then we will do it, then we will implement it. But nobody discussed such proposals. So there are peace proposals without giving up any part of the territory of, because this was not in the proposal, of the territory of Ukraine. So I think our imagination should direct it to any form of non-violent, not only resistance, but also of any way of interrupting this escalation of war, which is more and more dangerous for all. Yeah, and I think this is a question of courage, and this is not a question for cowards. So this is what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Werner. I see Felix raise hand. And please be brief because we are close to conclude our webinar. Okay, this hand was down, and it seems that there are no additional questions, observations, and so on. I would like to express gratefulness from European Network for Citizenship Education, from our working group Research in Civic Education, to all speakers and all participants of this wonderful webinar. I think we had very fruitful stimulating discussion, and this webinar, its video recording, will be also useful to people who are interested to learn about current trends in peace education. Thank you, and we are concluding our webinar, and I will repeat it in Russian. Уважаемые участники, друзья, большое спасибо всем за то, что присоединились к нашему семинару. Особенно большое спасибо спикерам, которые открыли глаза на массу современных трендов в гражданском образовании для развития культуры мира и критического анализа конфликтов. Я уверен в том, что видеозапись этого вебинара поможет людям, которые хотят разобраться в теме мирного образования, и поможет нам развивать восточноевропейскую сеть гражданского образования. Большое спасибо, и думаю, мы будем заканчивать наш вебинар-дискуссию. Спасибо.